Are you afraid of the dark? We have a story for you.
Hey there, everyone. Thanks for joining me tonight. Get yourself comfortable. Maybe pour a cup of coffee or tea, because we're going on a journey, not to bustling cities or famous landmarks. No, tonight we're heading to the forgotten places, the towns that time left behind, the communities that exist on old maps but seem to have been erased from modern memory. Small towns, we all know them. Population signs with 3 digits, one main street with a diner, a gas station, maybe a church or 2. Places where everybody knows everybody, where secrets are hard to keep, or so you'd think. But here's the thing about small towns. The smaller the population, the easier it is for something wrong to take root. The easier it is for darkness to spread through the entire community like an infection. When there's only 100 people in town, and 90 of them know something terrible, the other 10 don't stand a chance. Tonight, I'm sharing 10 stories. 10 real small towns where something went horribly, terribly wrong. Some of these places still exist, though barely. Others have been completely abandoned, left to decay in the woods or the desert or the mountains. But all of them share one thing in common. They're wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. These aren't urban legends. These aren't campfire stories. These are documented events, verified histories, places you can find on Google Maps, though I wouldn't recommend visiting, because some of these towns, they don't like outsiders, and the ones that are abandoned, well, there's usually a very good reason why everyone left. So settle in, lock your doors, and let me tell you about 10 small towns that prove sometimes the most isolated places on Earth are isolated for a reason. Let's begin. Story 1. Centralia, Pennsylvania, the town that burns. Our first town is one you might have heard of. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Population as of the last census, 7. That's right, 7 people, in a town that once housed over 1,000 residents. But what makes Centralia truly terrifying isn't that everyone left. It's what made them leave. Centralia is burning, and it has been for over 60 years. Let me take you back to May 27th, 1962, Memorial Day weekend. The town council decided to clean up the local landfill before the holiday. Standard procedure in small Pennsylvania mining towns. They'd done it dozens of times before. Pile up the trash, light it on fire, let it burn down, cover it with dirt. Simple, safe, routine. Except this time, the landfill was located in an abandoned strip mine, an old coal seam, and when they lit that fire, they didn't realize they were lighting a fuse. The fire spread down into the coal seam, into the maze of abandoned mining tunnels that honeycombed the ground beneath Centralia. And once it got down there, into those old, dry, oxygen-rich passages, it became impossible to extinguish. Now, for the first few years, people tried to ignore it. Sure, the ground was warm in some places. Sure, there were a few wisps of smoke coming up through cracks in the pavement. But this was a mining town. People were used to a little environmental damage. They'd lived through worse. But by the 1,970 seconds, it became impossible to ignore. Let me tell you what it's like living in Centralia now. Or rather, what it was like before most people finally gave up and left. You wake up in the morning, and the first thing you notice is the smell. Sulfur, rotten eggs, the smell of hell, some people called it. It seeps up through the floorboards, through cracks in your foundation. You can't escape it. It gets into your clothes, your furniture, your hair. You go outside, and the ground is warm beneath your feet. Even in the middle of winter, when there's snow everywhere else, the ground in Centralia stays warm. The snow melts in patches, creating these irregular patterns across the landscape. Beautiful in a way, terrifying in another. You walk down Main Street, and you can see smoke rising from cracks in the asphalt. Not a lot, just thin wisps, like the earth itself is breathing, exhaling, The pavement is buckled and cracked from the heat. In some places, it's collapsed entirely, revealing the orange glow beneath. But here's what really got to people: the sinkholes. Because when you have fires burning underground, the earth becomes unstable, hollow, and periodically, it just gives way. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was playing in his grandmother's backyard. Just a normal kid, doing normal kid things. And suddenly, the ground opened up beneath him. Just opened up. Like a mouth. He fell, 4 feet down, into a sinkhole that had appeared without warning. And if his cousin hadn't been there to grab him, to pull him out, he would have fallen deeper, into a hole that measured over 150 feet deep. A hole that was filled with carbon monoxide and toxic fumes. Todd survived. But that incident made national news, and it made people realize that Centralia wasn't just uncomfortable or inconvenient, it was actively trying to kill them. The government tried to fix it. Of course they did. In 1962, they tried to dig out the burning coal. Didn't work. In 1969, they tried to flood the mines. Didn't work. They tried cutting off the fire's oxygen supply. They tried drilling holes and pumping in fire-retardant slurry. They tried everything. Nothing worked. By 1984, the government gave up. They offered to buy out all the residents, offered to relocate everyone. Most people took the deal, sold their houses for whatever they could get, and left behind their homes, their history, their entire lives. But some refused to leave. Some said this was their town, their heritage, and they'd be damned if they'd let a fire drive them out. By 2002, the town's zip code was revoked. The U.S. Postal Service declared that Centralia no longer officially existed. By 2009, the Pennsylvania governor claimed eminent domain over all property in the borough, evicting everyone. Everyone except 7 people. 7 holdouts who refused to leave, who still live there now, in a town that doesn't technically exist, above a fire that will burn for another 250 years. I spoke to someone who visited Centralia recently. Urban explorer type, wanted to see the famous burning town, walk the abandoned streets, take some photos for Instagram. He told me what it's like there now. It's apocalyptic, he said. That's the only word for it. The old highway that used to run through town, Route 61, is completely destroyed, buckled and cracked and covered in graffiti. People call it the graffiti highway. It looks like something out of a nuclear war movie. The houses are mostly gone now, either demolished or collapsed. Just foundations left. Concrete steps leading up to nothing. Chimneys standing alone in empty lots, like grave markers. And it's quiet. That's what gets you. It's so quiet. No cars, no people, no birds even, just the wind and the sound of the ground shifting, because it does shift. You can hear it, this low groaning sound, like the earth is in pain. I walked down what used to be the main street, and I could feel the heat through my shoes. In October, it was 50 degrees outside, but the ground felt like summer pavement. And the smoke, God, the smoke. Everywhere you look, there's smoke rising from cracks in the ground, from old basement foundations, from the woods. It's like the whole town is slowly being consumed, digested by the earth. I bent down to look at one of the bigger vents, where smoke was pouring out pretty thick, and I could see it, down in the crack, this orange glow. Fire, actual fire, burning maybe 10-20 feet below the surface. And I realized, standing there, that I was standing on top of an inferno, that beneath my feet, extending in every direction, was a fire the size of a small city. A fire that's been burning since before I was born. A fire that will still be burning long after I'm dead. I left after about an hour. Couldn't take it anymore. The smell, the heat, the wrongness of it all. But mostly, it was the houses of those 7 holdouts, the ones who still live there. I saw one of them, this little house, well maintained, with a lawn and everything, smoke rising from the ground all around it. And I thought, what kind of person chooses to live in hell? There's something deeply unsettling about Centralia, not just because it's burning, but because it's a preview of what happens when we lose control, when nature, or our exploitation of nature, turns against us. The fire is expected to burn for another 250 years, at minimum. Some geologists think it could burn for 1,000 years. The coal seam is that extensive, which means Centralia will be a burning town long after everyone who remembers it has died. Long after the last photograph fades, it will just be a place on the map marked abandoned due to underground mine fire. A footnote in Pennsylvania's history, unless you go there. Unless you stand on that broken highway, feeling the heat through your shoes, smelling the sulfur in the air, watching the smoke rise from the dying town, then you understand. Centralia isn't abandoned. It's being consumed, and it will never stop burning. Story 2. Cahawba, Alabama, the ghost capital. Let's move south, to Alabama, to a town that was once the capital of the entire state. A town that, by all rights, should be a thriving city today. Instead, it's completely abandoned, has been for over 100 years. Welcome to Cahawba, or, as the locals call it, Old Cahawba, Alabama's first permanent state capital, and one of the most haunted places in the American South. Cahawba was founded in 1819, right when Alabama achieved statehood. It was perfectly positioned at the confluence of the Cahawba and Alabama rivers. Easy river transport, fertile land, strategic location. The state legislature met there. Governor's mansion was built there. It was supposed to be Alabama's crown jewel. For a while, it was. By the 1822, Cahawba was a booming town. Thousands of residents, elegant antebellum homes, cotton plantations surrounding the area, worked by enslaved people. It was wealth and power concentrated in one small riverside town. But then came the floods. See, those two rivers that made Cahawba so strategically valuable, they also made it vulnerable. When both rivers flooded at the same time, which they did periodically, the entire town would go underwater. Not a little water. We're talking 6, 8, 10 feet of floodwater covering the streets. The first major flood hit in 1825. The state legislature was literally driven out of the Capitol building by rising water. They had to evacuate in the middle of a session, swim out, some of them. After that, the writing was on the wall. In 1826, just 7 years after Cahawba became the capital, the state government moved to Tuscaloosa. Too dangerous to stay, they said. Too risky. But Cahawba didn't die. Not right away. The town adapted, became a center for cotton trading instead of politics, built levees, raised buildings on higher foundations. By the 1852, it had rebounded. Nearly 3,000 people lived there. It had hotels, stores, churches, a newspaper. It was thriving again. Then came the Civil War. During the war, Cahawba became the site of Cahawba Prison, a Confederate prison for captured Union soldiers. And this is where the story gets dark. The prison was meant to hold maybe a few hundred men. By 1865, it held over 3,000, packed in like sardines, no sanitation, minimal food. Disease ran rampant, men died daily. But here's what makes it worse. When the war ended and the prison closed, people started finding things. Bodies buried in shallow graves around the prison grounds. Evidence of abuse, torture. Some prisoners had been shot trying to escape. Others had simply died of neglect. The exact death toll was never determined. Records were destroyed or lost, but estimates range from a few hundred to over 1,000 Union soldiers who died at Cahawba Prison and were buried in unmarked graves. After the war, Cahawba tried to rebuild again, but things were different now. The economy had collapsed. The railroads bypassed the town, and those floods kept coming. In 1865, a massive flood destroyed most of the remaining structures. In 1870, another flood hit. By 1900, Cahawba was essentially abandoned. The last residents left. The buildings were torn down or simply collapsed. The land was reclaimed by forest and swamp. Today, Cahawba is a ghost town, an archaeological site. You can visit it, walk the old streets, see the remains of foundations, the columns from the old homes still standing in the middle of the woods like ancient ruins. But here's why I'm telling you about Cahawba. It's not just abandoned, it's haunted, and not in a vague, people say they've seen things way. In a documented, consistent, undeniable way. Let me tell you about Sarah. That's not her real name. She's a park ranger who works at the Cahawba historical site. I spoke to her a few months ago. I don't believe in ghosts, she told me, or at least, I didn't. I grew up rational, scientific. When I took this job, I thought all the ghost stories were just tourist bait, ways to get people interested in history. My first week, I was doing a solo patrol of the site. It was late evening, right before closing. I was walking near where the prison used to be, just checking the trail, making sure no one was there, and I heard singing. At first, I thought it was someone's phone, or maybe a visitor who'd stayed past hours. But it wasn't modern music. It was old, really old, the kind of song soldiers would sing, and it wasn't coming from one direction. It was everywhere, like it was coming up from the ground itself. I radioed my supervisor, asked if there were any living history events going on, any reenactors. He said no, said I should leave the site immediately and lock up. But before I left, I saw them, men in Union blue, just for a second, standing at the edge of the woods. Maybe 20 of them, just standing there, watching me. I blinked, and they were gone. But I swear to God, they were there, and they looked so tired, so impossibly tired. Sarah wasn't the only one. I found dozens of reports, park rangers, visitors, historians, archaeologists working the site, all reporting similar experiences. Apparitions in Civil War uniforms, always Union soldiers, always near the old prison site, singing late at night, old war songs, battle hymn of the Republic, When Johnny Comes Marching Home, cold spots. Even in Alabama summer heat, certain areas of the old prison grounds stay cold, unnaturally cold, and the smell. Multiple people reported smelling sickness, disease, the smell of unwashed bodies and death, in places where nothing stands but empty forest. But it's not just the prison that's haunted. The old town site, where the antebellum homes used to stand, has its own activity. People report seeing well-dressed figures in 1,850 seconds clothing, women in hoop skirts, men in top hats, walking the old streets that haven't existed for over a century. There's one particular spot, near where the governor's mansion used to stand. Visitors consistently report feeling watched there, feeling unwelcome. Some have reported being pushed or shoved by invisible hands, being told to leave in whispered voices. One couple was taking photographs of the old foundation stones. They reviewed their photos later and found something disturbing. In several shots, there were faces in the windows of buildings that no longer exist, just faces, barely visible, looking out at the camera. There's a theory about why Cahawba is so haunted. It's not just because people died there. People die everywhere. Cities are built on graves. No, Cahawba is haunted because it was abandoned while it still had life in it. Because it was killed, essentially. Killed by floods and war and economic collapse. And the spirits that remain are angry about it, confused about it. They don't understand why their thriving capital became a forgotten ruin, why their elegant homes are now just foundation stones, why their grand dreams became a swamp, and they're still there, still walking those old streets, still singing those old songs, still living in a town that died 150 years ago. The state of Alabama maintains Cahawba as a historical park now. They offer tours, guided walks through the old town site. They're very upfront about the paranormal activity. They even offer haunted history tours around Halloween, but they also have a rule. No one is allowed on the site after dark, not even staff, not even law enforcement, unless there's an emergency, because after dark, Cahawba belongs to its ghosts, and they don't like to be disturbed. Story 3. Bodie, California. The Curse. Now we're heading west, to California, to the high desert east of the Sierra Nevada mountains, to one of the most famous ghost towns in America, Bodie, California. If you've never been, Bodie is remarkable. It's not like other ghost towns where only a few structures remain. Bodie is preserved in what they call arrested decay, which means about 110 buildings still stand, exactly as they were when the last residents left in 1942. Furniture still in the houses, dishes still on the tables, stores still stocked with goods. It's like everyone just walked away one day and never came back, which, actually, is pretty much what happened. Bodie was a gold rush town, founded in 1859 when William S. Bodie discovered gold in the area. Within 20 years, it had exploded to a population of nearly 10,000 people. It was one of the richest mining towns in the West. The mines pulled out millions of dollars worth of gold. But Bodie was also one of the most violent towns in the American frontier. There's a phrase associated with Bodie, "bad man from Bodie." It was used throughout California and Nevada. If someone was called a bad man from Bodie, it meant they were dangerous, violent, someone to be feared, because Bodie earned that reputation honestly. At its peak, Bodie had murders happening weekly, sometimes daily, shootouts in the streets, bar fights that ended in death, claim disputes settled with bullets. It was lawless, wild, deadly. The town had 65 saloons and only a handful of churches. It had red light districts that operated openly. It had opium dens and gambling houses and every vice you can imagine. But what really sets Bodie apart, what makes it special in the pantheon of Old West ghost towns, is the curse. The curse of Bodie. Let me explain. When Bodie became a state historic park in 1962, they implemented a strict rule. Nothing could be taken from the town. No artifacts, no souvenirs, nothing. Everything had to remain exactly where it was, preserving the town in its abandoned state. Makes sense from a historical preservation standpoint. But there's a more sinister reason for this rule. Because people who take things from Bodie, bad things happen to them. The Bodie Foundation, which helps maintain the park, receives dozens of packages every year. Packages from people returning items they took from Bodie. And almost all of these packages include letters, apology letters, letters describing the terrible luck that befell them after taking something from the ghost town. I got access to some of these letters. Let me read you a few. I took a rusty nail from one of the buildings in Bodie 3 years ago. Since then, I've lost my job. My wife divorced me. My house burned down, and I was diagnosed with cancer. Please return this nail to where it came from. I believe it's cursed. Another. My daughter took a small rock from the cemetery in Bodie. Within a month, she was in a car accident that left her paralyzed. We're returning the rock. Please put it back. Please end this curse. Another. I took a piece of wood from an old structure in Bodie as a souvenir. My son died 2 weeks later. My business failed. I developed a brain tumor. I'm dying now. I'm sending this back. Tell people not to take anything from Bodie. It's not worth it. Dozens of letters like this. Hundreds over the years. All describing similar patterns. Serious illness, financial ruin, death of loved ones, catastrophic accidents, and all of it starting shortly after taking something from Bodie. Now, you might be thinking this is coincidence, bad luck attributed to a superstition, and maybe you're right, but the pattern is consistent, unnervingly consistent. The park rangers have a file, a thick file, documenting every case of Bodie curse they've investigated. And while they won't officially acknowledge the curse exists, they also won't deny it. I talked to a former park ranger named Michael, who worked at Bodie for 15 years. Look, he said, I'm a rational guy. I studied history, not supernatural nonsense. But working in Bodie changes you. You see things, experience things that make you question what you thought you knew. The curse is real. I'm not saying I understand it. I'm not saying it's ghosts or spirits or whatever. But there's something in Bodie that doesn't want to be disturbed. I've seen people take artifacts despite the warnings, despite the signs, despite us literally telling them not to. They laugh it off, say it's just superstition, and then, a few months later, we get a package, the item returned, and a letter describing what happened to them. The worst case I ever saw was a guy who took a child's doll from one of the houses. Old porcelain doll, probably from the 1882. Beautiful antique. Would have been worth money, maybe. He took it despite our warnings, despite the posted rules, just grabbed it and walked out. 6 months later, his 8-year-old daughter drowned in their backyard pool. Just drowned. No explanation. She was a good swimmer. No signs of distress. She just went under and didn't come back up. He returned the doll a week after her funeral. Included a note that just said, "I'm sorry. Please take it back. Please, we put the doll back where it came from, in the bedroom of one of the houses. And you know what? That doll has moved. Multiple times. We'll put it on the nightstand, and the next day, it'll be in the corner, or facing a different direction, or sitting in a chair." We eventually stopped moving it. Let it sit wherever it wants to sit. Seems safer that way. But the curse isn't limited to people who take physical objects. Even photographs can be problematic. There are certain buildings in Bodie, certain spots, where cameras malfunction. Digital cameras will show corrupted images. Film cameras will produce strange anomalies. Figures appearing in windows of empty buildings. Faces in mirrors where no one stood. Shadow shapes that weren't visible to the naked eye. And people who take these photographs sometimes report bad luck too. Nothing as severe as those who take artifacts, but enough to be noticeable. Equipment failures, unexplained illnesses, a sense of being followed or watched. One woman told me she photographed the old Bodie schoolhouse. She developed the photos and found what looked like children in the windows, at least a dozen children, all dressed in period clothing, all staring out at the camera. The schoolhouse was empty when she took the photo. She was alone at Bodie that day, visiting during the off-season. She said she started having nightmares after that. Dreams of being in the schoolhouse. Dreams of children singing, and in the dreams, the children would turn to look at her, and their eyes would be empty, black, void. The dreams stopped only after she destroyed the photographs, burned them. The question is, why? Why is Bodie cursed? What makes this particular ghost town so protective of its artifacts? Some say it's because of all the violence, all the deaths, all the tragedy. That much pain, that much suffering, it soaks into the land, into the buildings, into the objects. And taking those objects means taking a piece of that pain with you. Others say it's the ghosts themselves, that the spirits of Bodie's dead residents are territorial. They don't want their town dismantled piece by piece. They don't want their possessions scattered. They want to keep Bodie intact, exactly as it was when they lived there. And maybe they're right, because if you visit Bodie, if you walk those empty streets and look into those abandoned buildings, you feel it. That sense of being watched, that sense that the town is still inhabited, still lived in, just not by anyone you can see. The park rangers tell a story about closing time. Every evening at 5 p.m., they close the park and do a sweep to make sure no visitors are still inside. It's a routine check, but they always do it quickly. And they always leave together, never alone, because after 5 p.m., after the sun starts to set and the shadows grow long, Bodie comes alive. Not with tourists, with ghosts. Rangers have reported seeing lights in buildings that have no electricity, hearing music from pianos that haven't been tuned in 100 years, smelling cooking food from kitchens with no stoves, seeing people, dozens of people, walking the streets, going about their business, living their lives, and then, in an instant, they're gone. Bodie doesn't want to be disturbed. It doesn't want to be taken apart. It wants to remain exactly as it is. A snapshot of 1,880 seconds, mining town life, preserved forever. And if you try to take something from Bodie, if you try to violate that preservation, the town will take something from you, something much more valuable than a rusty nail or an old photograph. The curse of Bodie is real, and the only way to break it is to return what you took, if you're lucky enough to get that chance. Story 4. Pittsburgh, Kansas. The mine collapse that never ended. Let's talk about Pittsburgh, Kansas, not to be confused with Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This Pittsburgh is small, about 20,000 people, located in the southeast corner of Kansas, right on the border with Missouri. And Pittsburgh, Kansas, has a secret buried beneath it, literally buried, because underneath Pittsburgh is a maze of abandoned mine tunnels, hundreds of miles of them, coal mines and zinc mines and lead mines, all dug between 1,870 and 1,970. When the mining industry collapsed, the mines were simply abandoned, sealed up, left to decay underground. Most towns would forget about old mines, but Pittsburgh can't forget, because the mines are still there, still causing problems, still, in some cases, actively collapsing, and taking people with them. Let me tell you about what happened in 2001. It was July, middle of summer. A residential neighborhood on the west side of Pittsburgh. Normal houses, normal families. Nothing unusual, until the ground opened up. A sinkhole appeared in someone's front yard. Not a small one. We're talking 30 feet across, 50 feet deep. It appeared overnight. One day, there was a lawn. The next day, there was a gaping hole leading down into an abandoned mine shaft. The city evacuated the surrounding houses, brought in engineers. They discovered that the entire neighborhood was undermined. Honeycomb of old mine tunnels running beneath every house, every street. The ground was essentially hollow. They condemned 14 houses, just condemned them, told people to get out, take what they could carry, and leave, because the ground could collapse at any moment. But here's what makes this terrifying. Those were just the houses they knew about. They only did ground-penetrating radar on that one neighborhood because of the sinkhole. The rest of Pittsburgh? No one knows what's underneath. The mine maps are incomplete, inaccurate, sometimes completely wrong, which means anyone living in Pittsburgh could be living above an abandoned mine tunnel, could have their house collapse into the earth at any moment, and there's no way to know until it happens. I talked to someone who lives in Pittsburgh. Her name is Linda. She's lived there her whole life, 73 years old. I remember when they were still mining, she told me. My father worked in the mines. My grandfather, my uncles, everyone worked in the mines back then. It's what built this town. But we all knew the mines were dangerous. Not just from cave-ins or gas explosions, but from what they left behind when they closed. When I was a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, I was playing in a field near my house. This was in the 1,960 seconds, and I felt the ground shaking, not like an earthquake, more like something moving underneath me. I ran home and told my father. He went white, grabbed me and my siblings, and made us stay inside for 2 days. Later, I found out what happened. A mine tunnel had collapsed, not far from where I was playing. If I'd been standing 20 feet in a different direction, I would have fallen in. They filled that collapse with concrete. But there are hundreds more tunnels under Pittsburgh, thousands maybe, and they're all old, all unstable. I've lived in the same house for 50 years, and I think about it every day. Whether this will be the day my house falls into the earth, whether I'll wake up to my bedroom floor giving way, whether I'll die like those miners did, buried alive in the dark. But the sinkholes aren't even the worst part. The worst part is what comes up from the mines. You see, when you abandon a mine, you don't just seal it and walk away. There are things down there, water, chemicals, gases, and they don't stay put. In Pittsburgh, they have acid mine drainage. The old mines fill with water. The water reacts with the iron and sulfur in the rock, creates sulfuric acid, and that acidic water seeps up through cracks in the ground, poisoning wells, killing vegetation, contaminating soil. There are places in Pittsburgh where nothing will grow, where the ground is permanently dead because of the acid seeping up from below. And then there's the gas, methane, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, all trapped in the old mine tunnels, and periodically it finds a way out, seeps up through basements, through cracks in foundations, into people's homes. In 1995, a house in Pittsburgh exploded, just exploded, middle of the night, the entire structure blown apart. 2 people died. Investigation determined it was methane gas from an abandoned mine. The gas had been seeping into the basement for weeks, maybe months, accumulating. And then, something sparked. A pilot light. A light switch. We'll never know exactly what, but the result was catastrophic. The city instituted a methane monitoring program after that. They check houses periodically for gas buildup, but it's voluntary, and it only covers a small portion of the town. Most people live with the risk, because what choice do they have? Where else would they go? But here's what really makes Pittsburgh unsettling. The sounds. People report hearing sounds coming from underground, especially at night, especially when it rains, like tonight, and the water seeps down into the old tunnels, banging, like metal on metal. The sound of pickaxes hitting rock, the sound of mining cars rolling on tracks that haven't been used in 50 years. Voices, faint, echoing, like conversations happening far below, like men calling to each other in the dark and screaming. Sometimes, people hear screaming from underground, distant, muffled by layers of earth and rock, but unmistakable. Linda told me about this too. I hear them, she said. The miners, they're still down there, still working, or still trapped. I don't know which is worse. My bedroom is on the first floor, and sometimes, late at night, I hear them under my house, digging, always digging, like they're trying to get out, like they're trying to claw their way back to the surface. I told my daughter about it once. She said it was just the pipes, or the house settling. But I know what I hear. I've been hearing it for 30 years, and it's getting louder, closer, like they're almost here. Like one day I'm going to wake up and they'll be in my bedroom, coming up through the floor, covered in coal dust and blood, still trapped in the moment they died, still mining, forever. The city of Pittsburgh has tried to address the mine problem. They've filled some of the larger voids with concrete. They've capped some of the entrances. They've installed monitoring systems for gas and subsidence, but it's too big. There are too many miles of tunnels. Too much of the town is undermined. They can't fix it. They can only manage it, react to collapses when they happen, evacuate people when sinkholes appear, and hope that the next collapse doesn't take anyone with it. There's a memorial in Pittsburgh, in the city cemetery, for the miners who died in the mines over the years. Hundreds of names carved in stone, men who were crushed, suffocated, drowned, blown apart, all in the pursuit of coal and zinc and lead. But the memorial is incomplete, because no one knows how many miners are still down there, how many were trapped in collapses and never recovered, how many bodies are still in those tunnels, buried under tons of rock. Some estimates say dozens, others say hundreds, and those miners, they're still there, still in the dark, still in the cold and the wet and the crushing weight of the earth, still mining, still digging, still trying to get out. Pittsburgh, Kansas, a town built on the backs of miners, a town undermined by their industry, a town that's slowly, inevitably, sinking back into the earth that gave it life. And the miners are waiting, down below, in the dark, waiting for the rest of the town to join them. Story 5. Colonia Dignidad, Chile, the compound. Now we're leaving the United States, heading south, way south, to Chile, to the foothills of the Andes Mountains. to a place that was technically a town but functioned as something much darker, Colonia Dignidad, the Dignity Colony. And before we go further, I need to warn you, this story is disturbing, really disturbing. It involves child abuse, torture, and murder. If you need to skip ahead, I understand, but this is a real place, a real history, and it's important that people know what happened there. Colonia Dignidad was founded in 1961 by a German man named Paul Schaefer. He was a former Nazi medic who fled Germany in 1959 to escape child sexual abuse charges. He took about 300 German immigrants with him to Chile, told them they were going to create a utopia, a perfect Christian community in the mountains. What he actually created was a prison, a torture compound, a nightmare that lasted for 30 years. The colony was isolated, completely isolated, located in rural Chile, hours from the nearest town. High walls, guard towers, armed patrols. Getting in was difficult, getting out was impossible. Schaefer ruled the colony like a dictator. He controlled everything: food, clothing, information, communication. Families were separated. Children were taken from their parents and raised communally. Men and women were segregated. Marriage was forbidden, and Schaefer sexually abused the children, systematically, for decades. Boys primarily, but girls too. He would select children as young as 5 or 6 and abuse them repeatedly, and anyone who objected or tried to protect the children was punished severely. But the horror of Colonia Dignidad goes deeper than one man's crimes, because in 1973, when Augusto Pinochet staged a military coup in Chile and took power, Schaefer offered the services of Colonia Dignidad to the new dictator, and Pinochet accepted. The colony became a torture center for the Pinochet regime. Political prisoners, dissidents, anyone the government wanted to disappear, they were brought to Colonia Dignidad, interrogated, tortured, and in many cases, murdered. The colonists, the German immigrants who had come seeking a better life, were forced to participate, or at minimum, forced to stay silent while it happened. They heard the screams, they saw the bodies, they knew what was going on, but they couldn't leave, and they couldn't tell anyone, because Colonia Dignidad had no contact with the outside world. No phones, no mail, no visitors. It was completely isolated, and even if someone escaped, who would believe them? The Chilean government was complicit. The German embassy ignored complaints. The colony had money and political connections. Anyone who spoke out would be silenced. Let me tell you what life was like inside Colonia Dignidad. You wake up at 5 a.m. every day, without exception. You work until dark, farming, building, whatever Schaefer demands. You get minimal food, minimal rest, no freedom. You're not allowed to speak to your family. Even if they're in the colony with you, you're kept separate. Children don't know their parents. Spouses don't speak to each other. You're watched constantly. Schaefer has informants everywhere. If you express doubt, if you question anything, you're reported, and then you're punished. Punishment means isolation, means beating, means being drugged with psychiatric medications to keep you compliant, means electroshock therapy, means torture, and if you try to escape, if you actually make it over the walls and into the Chilean countryside, they send search parties, armed men on motorcycles, dogs, and when they catch you, and they always catch you, you're brought back and made an example of. Public beatings, electrocution, psychological torture. They break you. Make sure everyone else sees you broken. Make sure no one else tries to run. The torture facility was in the basement of the main compound, a series of rooms built underground, soundproofed, equipped with medical instruments that Schaefer had acquired through his connections. Chilean prisoners would be brought in at night, blindfolded, taken underground, and then the screaming would start. The colonists could hear it, even with the soundproofing, even from their barracks. They could hear people being tortured, people being killed. One former colonist, who escaped in 1997, described it like this: "We knew what was in the basement. Everyone knew. We'd see the trucks arrive at night. hear the prisoners being taken inside, and then, for hours, we'd hear screaming, or we'd hear nothing, which was somehow worse. In the morning, the trucks would leave, sometimes with the same number of prisoners, sometimes with fewer, sometimes with none. We never asked what happened to them. We knew some were buried on the colony grounds. Others were taken to the mountains and disappeared. The regime didn't want bodies. They wanted people to vanish. And Schaefer, he got paid for this. The government paid him for every prisoner he handled. It was business. Torture as business. But it wasn't just the government prisoners. Schaefer experimented on us too. The colonists. We were his test subjects. He'd drug us, see how different medications affected us, how much pain we could endure, how far he could push us before we broke. He created a slave population, and we couldn't do anything about it. We were trapped. Colonia Dignidad operated openly until 1997. That's when the Chilean government finally raided the compound, arrested Schaefer, though he fled to Argentina and wasn't captured until 2005. They dissolved the colony, freed the residents. But the horror didn't end, because when investigators searched the compound, they found evidence of decades of abuse, torture rooms, mass graves, medical equipment used for experimentation, files documenting hundreds of victims. They also found something else, a network of underground tunnels, miles of them, connecting different parts of the compound, leading out into the mountains. Some collapsed, some still passable. And in those tunnels, they found bones, lots of bones. They've never been able to determine exactly how many people died at Colonia Dignidad. Estimates range from hundreds to over 1,000. The records were destroyed. The bodies were hidden. The survivors are traumatized and can't remember or won't speak about what they saw. But the bones tell a story of systematic murder, of people tortured to death and thrown into the tunnels like garbage, of a genocide happening in slow motion over 30 years while the world looked away. Today, Colonia Dignidad still exists. It's been renamed Villa Baviera, the Bavarian village. It's a tourist destination now. You can visit. They have a hotel, a restaurant. They offer tours. The remaining colonists, the ones who didn't leave after Schaefer's arrest, still live there. They run the tourist operation. They say they've changed, that they're rebuilding, that they want to move past the horror. But visitors report strange things, seeing people in the windows of buildings that are supposed to be empty, hearing screaming late at night, finding old torture equipment hidden in storage rooms, being told by local staff not to go into certain areas, certain buildings, certain parts of the compound. And there are the children. Multiple visitors have reported seeing children at Villa Baviera, children who don't speak, who don't play, who just watch, who seem wrong somehow, off, like they're not quite there. But when these visitors ask about the children, the staff say there are no children at Villa Baviera, that all the children left years ago, that what they're seeing must be shadows, tricks of light. But the visitors know what they saw. Children, real children, watching them, silent, waiting. One tourist, an American woman named Rachel, told me about her visit in 2019. We went because my husband is interested in dark tourism. He wanted to see where Colonia Dignidad was. I was reluctant, but I went. The place is beautiful, superficially. Mountain views, nice buildings, clean and well-maintained. But there's something wrong with it. You can feel it, like the evil soaked into the ground and never left. We took a tour. The guide, an older German woman who'd been a colonist, showed us around. She was very careful about what she told us. Very sanitized version of history. Said Schaefer was a bad man, but that's all in the past now. But I saw things she didn't mention. Saw a building with barred windows. Saw what looked like a guard tower, still standing. Saw doors with heavy locks on the outside. And I saw a little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in the doorway of one of the buildings, just standing there, staring at me. I waved at him. He didn't wave back. didn't move, just stared. I asked the guide who he was. She looked where I was pointing and said there's no one there. But I was looking right at him. He was there. Later, we were eating dinner at the hotel restaurant, and I saw him again. Same boy, in the window, just watching. I couldn't sleep that night. Kept thinking about him. About all the children who suffered at Colonia Dignidad. About how some of them never left, not because they chose to stay, but because they died there, and their bodies were hidden in those tunnels, and their spirits are still there, still trapped, still suffering. We left the next morning. I'll never go back. Some places can't be redeemed. Some evil is too deep. Colonia Dignidad is one of those places. It should have been burned to the ground. Salt poured on the earth. Every building destroyed. Every tunnel filled. Every trace of what happened there erased. Instead, they turned it into a tourist attraction, and the ghosts of the children Schaefer murdered are still there, still watching, still waiting for justice that will never come. Colonia Dignidad, a town that was never really a town, a colony that was really a prison, a community that was really a torture camp. And despite the name change, despite the tour guides and the hotel and the restaurant, it remains what it always was, a place of unspeakable evil, a place where hundreds, maybe thousands, suffered and died, a place that should terrify anyone who knows its history. Because the horror of Colonia Dignidad isn't just what happened there, it's that it was allowed to happen for 30 years, and that most of the perpetrators were never punished, and that the victims are still there, buried in unmarked graves, hidden in sealed tunnels, forgotten by everyone except those who survived, and those who visit and see the ghosts of children in the windows, children who will never leave, children who died waiting for rescue that never came. Story 6. Monowi, Nebraska, population 1. Let's come back to the United States, back to simpler horror, or at least horror that seems simpler on the surface. Nebraska, the Great Plains, endless farmland, stretching in every direction, and somewhere in that vastness, in Boyd County, there's a town, Monowi, Nebraska, population 1. That's not a typo. One person, singular, the only remaining resident of what was once a thriving small town. Her name is Elsie Eiler. She's in her 80s now, and she is literally the only person living in Monowi, the only resident, the mayor, the librarian, the bar owner, everything. But here's what makes Monowi unsettling. It's not empty. Not exactly. Monowi was founded in 1902. At its peak in the 1,932, it had a population of 150, not huge, but substantial for a rural Nebraska town. It had a post office, a school, 2 grain elevators, several businesses. It was a community. But then came the farm consolidation. Small farms being bought up by bigger operations, mechanization reducing the need for labor, the young people leaving for cities, the slow death of rural America. By 2000, Monowi had a population of 2, Elsie and her husband Rudy. They ran the Monowi Tavern together, stayed in town when everyone else left. Someone had to, they figured. Someone had to keep the lights on. Rudy died in 2004, and Elsie stayed. She's been alone ever since. I spoke to Elsie on the phone. She's sharp, funny, doesn't think there's anything particularly strange about being the only person in town. People make it out to be more dramatic than it is, she told me. I'm busy. I run the tavern, maintain the library in memory of Rudy, handle the town paperwork. I don't have time to be lonely. Sure, it's quiet, but I grew up in rural Nebraska. Quiet is normal. Empty is normal. You make your own company out here. But then I asked her if she ever feels like she's being watched, if she ever feels like she's not quite alone in Monowi. There was a long pause. Yes, she finally said. Yes, I do feel that sometimes. Here's what Elsie told me, though she was reluctant to talk about it. Monowi isn't empty. The buildings are still there. About a dozen structures, houses, The old grain elevators, the tavern, the library, the church. And according to Elsie, there are still people in those buildings. Not living people, but people nonetheless. I see them sometimes, she said, out of the corner of my eye. Someone walking past a window in the house across the street. Someone standing in the doorway of the old general store. Someone sitting on the church steps. I'll turn to look and they're gone. But I know I saw them. I know what I saw. At first, I thought I was going crazy, being alone too much. But it's been 20 years now, and they're still there. Still walking around, still living their lives, I guess. Or whatever you call what they're doing. I think they're the old residents. The people who lived here when Monowi was alive. They died, but they never left. Maybe they don't know how to leave. Maybe they don't want to. This was their home, and now it's my home too. Me and the ghosts. But it's not just Elsie who's experienced things in Monowi. Visitors report strange occurrences too. The tavern is open to the public. It's actually become something of a tourist attraction. People drive out to Monowi specifically to have a beer in the smallest town in America, to meet Elsie, to see what a one-person town looks like, and many of those visitors leave with stories. One couple told me about their visit in 2021. We drove out to Monowi on a Sunday afternoon. It's in the middle of nowhere, flat farmland as far as you can see. And then you come over a hill and there's this cluster of buildings. Monowi. The town looks frozen in time, like everyone just left one day and never came back, which is basically what happened. The houses are empty, the grain elevators are rusting, everything's slowly falling apart, except the tavern. The tavern is immaculate. Elsie keeps it clean, keeps it running. We went in, and she served us beers and we talked for a while. She's lovely, very welcoming, but while we were there, we kept hearing noises from other parts of the building, footsteps upstairs, doors closing, voices, faint voices, like people having conversations in other rooms. We asked Elsie if anyone else was there. She said no, just her, just like always. We stayed for about an hour, and the whole time we heard things, movement, activity, like the tavern was full of people we couldn't see. When we left, my wife looked back at the tavern. She swears she saw faces in the upstairs windows, multiple faces, looking down at us. I didn't see them, but I believe her, because something was in that building with us, something other than Elsie. Another visitor, a photographer documenting American ghost towns, had an even stranger experience. He visited Monowi in 2019, took photographs of all the buildings, the empty houses, the church, the grain elevators, artistic shots of abandonment and decay. When he reviewed his photos later, he found something disturbing. In almost every shot, there were people, not Elsie, other people, standing in windows, sitting on porches, walking down the street, dozens of them, all dressed in clothing from the 1,930 seconds and 40 seconds. He hadn't seen anyone when he took the photos. Monowi was empty except for Elsie, and she was at the tavern the whole time he was shooting. But there they were in the images, clear as day. People who shouldn't be there. People who couldn't be there. He showed the photos to Elsie, asked if she recognized anyone. Yes, she said. That's Harold. He ran the general store. And that's Martha. She taught at the school. And that's the Johnsons. They farmed north of town. And that's... She stopped, looked at the photographer. They're all dead, she said. Every single one of them. They've been dead for decades. The thing about Monowi is that it represents something profound. It's not just a one-person town. It's a monument to the death of rural America, to the slow abandonment of small towns across the Midwest. Thousands of towns like Monowi exist, towns that are dying or already dead, where the population has dwindled to single digits or zero, where Main Street is empty, where the school closed decades ago, where the post office shut down, where the only business is a gas station struggling to survive. These towns are ghosts, not in the supernatural sense, though maybe in that sense too, but in the sense that they're shadows of what they once were. echoes of a way of life that no longer exists. And Monowi is the ultimate expression of that death. One person keeping an entire town alive. One person maintaining buildings that no one uses. One person running a government for a town with no citizens. It's sad. It's lonely, and it's eerie, because when Elsie dies, and she will eventually, Monowi will truly be empty. The population will be zero, and all those ghosts, all those spirits of former residents, will be the only ones left, walking empty streets, living in abandoned houses, drinking at a tavern with no bartender, going about their lives in a town that no longer exists. Elsie told me she's made peace with it, with being alone, with being the last person in Monowi. When I go, she said, I'll go to wherever Rudy is, and maybe we'll both come back here, join the others, keep the town going, even if no one alive can see us. Because Monowi isn't empty. It never was. It's just that most of the residents aren't visible anymore, and that's okay. They're good company. They don't make noise. They don't cause trouble. They're just here, living their lives, or deaths, or whatever you want to call it. And when I join them, Monowi will finally be complete again. All of us here, all of us together, forever. I think about that sometimes. About Elsie's words, about the future of Monowi, about a ghost town that's full of ghosts, about a place that's both completely empty and completely full, about the loneliest place in America that maybe isn't lonely at all, because the dead never really leave. They just become invisible, and in Monowi, Nebraska, they're waiting for Elsie, waiting to welcome her home. Story 7. Helltown, Ohio, the government experiment. Now we're heading to Ohio, to the northern part of the state, near Cleveland, to a place that's officially called Boston, Ohio. But everyone who knows about it calls it by a different name, Helltown. And yes, that's a real nickname. And yes, there's a very good reason for it. Helltown's story begins in 1974. The National Park Service decided to expand Cuyahoga Valley National Park. They needed land, and there was a small community in their way, about 50 families living in Boston, Ohio. The government used eminent domain, forced everyone to sell their homes and leave, offered what they called fair market value, though most residents say it was significantly less than their properties were worth. But it didn't matter. They had no choice. The government wanted the land, and the government was going to get it. By 1975, Boston, Ohio was empty. 50 families displaced, 50 homes abandoned, and the National Park Service did nothing with it. The houses just sat there, empty, boarded up, slowly decaying. For years, for decades, the Park Service said they were going to demolish the structures and reclaim the land for nature, but they didn't. They just left them, and that's when things got strange. The most famous landmark in Helltown is the school bus, an old yellow school bus, abandoned in the woods, still parked where it stopped, windows intact, seats still inside, as if the children just got off and never came back. Local legend says the bus crashed, that the children died, that their ghosts still haunt the bus, that if you visit at night, you can hear them singing, playing, screaming. The Park Service says the bus was simply left behind when a property was vacated, that it's just an abandoned vehicle, nothing more. They've had to repeatedly remove graffiti from it because it's become such a tourist attraction. But here's what makes the bus unsettling. Multiple people have reported the same experience. They visit the bus during the day, take photos, everything's normal. But when they look at the photos later, there are faces in the windows, children's faces, pressed against the glass, watching. And at night, if you're brave enough or foolish enough to visit the bus after dark, you hear things, laughter, singing, the sound of small feet running through the woods. And sometimes, if you look inside the bus, you see them, shadows shaped like children, sitting in the seats, waiting for a ride that will never come. But the bus is just one piece of Helltown's strangeness. There's also the church, the Mother of Sorrows Catholic Church, also called Mother of God, church, depending on who you ask. It stands on a hill overlooking the abandoned neighborhood. White building, cross on top, looks normal from a distance, but get closer and you notice things. The doors and windows are welded shut, not boarded, welded. Heavy steel plates covering every entrance, like they didn't just want to keep people out, they wanted to keep something in. Local legend says the church was used for satanic rituals after the town was evacuated, that the government allowed it, or conducted them, or something darker. The stories vary. What's consistent is that people who visit the church report overwhelming feelings of dread, of evil, of wrongness. Many visitors have panic attacks. Others report seeing figures in the graveyard behind the church, robed figures, standing in a circle, chanting. The Park Service denies any satanic activity, says the church was sealed because it was structurally unsafe and they didn't want liability from trespassers, which makes sense, except they left dozens of other buildings unsealed. Why was this particular church so dangerous it needed to be welded shut? And then there's the road, End of the World Road, as it's locally known, also called Stanford Road. It's a winding road through the forest, steep, dark even during the day because of the tree canopy, and at night, it's pitch black. The road ends abruptly, just ends, dead end. And the locals say that if you drive to the end of the road at midnight, turn off your engine, and wait, something will approach your car, something that isn't human, something that doesn't want you there. Descriptions vary. Some say it's a figure in robes, others say it's something with red eyes, others say it's the ghosts of the displaced residents, angry that their homes were taken, looking for revenge on anyone who dares visit their town. What's consistent is that people leave End of the World Road terrified. Cars that were working fine suddenly won't start, batteries dead, engines failed, and while you're sitting in your dead car in the pitch black forest, you hear it, footsteps getting closer, and breathing, heavy, right outside your window, and then, suddenly, your car starts. The engine turns over on its own, and you drive away as fast as you can, and you never go back. But here's where Helltown gets really disturbing. Beyond the legends, beyond the ghost stories, because there's evidence that something genuinely wrong happened in Boston, Ohio, after the government evacuated the town. The National Park Service's explanation for the evacuation has never made sense. They needed the land for the park. Okay, but why force residents out so quickly? Why offer such low prices? Why use such aggressive tactics? And why, after evacuating everyone, did they do nothing with the land for decades? Some researchers have proposed an alternative theory, that the evacuation wasn't about park expansion, it was about a chemical spill. In 1974, the same year as the evacuation, there were reports of a train derailment near Boston, Ohio, a train carrying industrial chemicals. The official story says the chemicals were contained, that there was minimal environmental impact, but locals remember differently. They remember being told to evacuate immediately, remember being told their water was contaminated, remember being warned not to return, ever, and they remember that the government bought their properties, but didn't demolish the houses, didn't clear the land, just left everything exactly as it was, as if the area was too contaminated to safely work in, as if the government wanted to forget Boston, Ohio, ever existed. I spoke to someone who grew up in Boston before the evacuation. Her name is Margaret. She's in her 60s now. I was 13 when they made us leave, she told me. One day we had a home. The next day, government agents were at our door telling us we had 2 weeks to pack up and leave. They wouldn't explain why, just said it was for park expansion. But my father didn't believe them. He tried to fight it, tried to get a lawyer, but there was nothing he could do. We left, moved to Cleveland, and for years, I tried to forget about Boston, tried to move on. But then I started having health problems, weird problems, thyroid issues, unexplained tumors, autoimmune disorders. I did some research. Found out that several other people who lived in Boston in the 72nds had similar problems. Cancer, neurological issues, birth defects in their children, way higher rates than normal. And I realized something happened in Boston, something the government didn't want us to know about. Maybe a chemical spill, maybe something worse. And they evacuated us to cover it up, but they didn't clean it up. They just left it, left the contamination, left the evidence, left everything to rot. And now people go there looking for ghosts, looking for thrills. They have no idea what they're exposing themselves to, what's in the soil, what's in the water, what's still there. Is Helltown haunted? Maybe. The bus, the church, the road, the abandoned houses, all of them have consistent reports of paranormal activity. But maybe the real horror of Helltown isn't supernatural. Maybe it's very real, very human, very deliberate. A town evacuated under suspicious circumstances. Families displaced with minimal compensation. Evidence of potential contamination ignored or covered up. Health problems in former residents that were never properly investigated. And decades later, the abandoned town left as a warning. Or a tomb. A place where the government's sins are buried under collapsing houses and overgrown yards, and legends of ghosts and Satanists. Helltown is creepy. It's unsettling. It's scary, but not because of ghosts. Because of what it represents. What it reveals about how easy it is for a small town to simply disappear, for families to be erased from their homes with no recourse, for questions to go unanswered, for truth to be buried under official explanations that don't quite add up. The National Park Service maintains that Boston, Ohio, now called Helltown, is perfectly safe. That the urban legends are just that, legends, that there's no contamination, no cover-up, no conspiracy. But the boarded-up houses remain, the sealed church remains, the abandoned bus remains, the health problems in former residents remain, and the questions remain. What really happened in Helltown? Why was everyone really evacuated? And what's still there, buried under the soil, that the government doesn't want anyone to find? Visit if you want. The Park Service allows it. Walk through the abandoned neighborhood. See the bus. Stand in front of the sealed church. Drive end of the world road. But maybe bring a Geiger counter, just in case Margaret is right. Just in case Helltown is hell, not because of ghosts, but because of something much worse. Something that never goes away. Something that soaks into the earth and the water and the air and the bodies of anyone unlucky enough to be there when it happened. Helltown, Ohio, where the ghosts might not be supernatural at all, but the horror is very, very real. Story 8. Wittenoom, Australia, the town that kills. Let's travel to the other side of the world, to Australia, to Western Australia specifically, to the outback, hundreds of miles from any major city, where the temperature regularly exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit, where water is scarce and the land is harsh. There's a town there, or there was a town that the Australian government has spent decades trying to erase from existence. Wittenoom, population 0, officially, but not 0 in reality, because there are still people living in Wittenoom, and they're dying, slowly, painfully. Wittenoom was founded in 1947 as a mining town, blue asbestos mining specifically. The company was called Australian Blue Asbestos. They discovered massive deposits of blue asbestos fiber in the Wittenoom Gorge, and for 20 years, from 1947 to 1966, they mined it. At its peak, Wittenoom had a population of 20,000 people. It was a company town. Australian Blue Asbestos owned everything: the houses, the stores, the hospital, the school, everything. And everyone worked for the mine. Men worked underground, digging out the asbestos. Women worked in the processing plant, sorting and packaging the fibers. Children played in the tailings piles, the waste material from the mine that was just dumped around the town. The whole town was covered in a fine blue dust, It coated everything: the streets, the buildings, people's lungs. Blue asbestos is the most dangerous form of asbestos. When you breathe in the microscopic fibers, they lodge in your lungs. They never dissolve, never break down. They just stay there, forever. And over time, decades sometimes, they cause cancer, mesothelioma specifically, cancer of the lining of the lungs. It's aggressive, it's painful, and it's always fatal. The company knew. Of course they knew. By the 1950 seconds, medical science had established the link between asbestos and cancer. But Australian blue asbestos kept mining, kept exposing workers, kept covering the town in toxic dust. They told workers it was safe, told families it was safe, told everyone that the dust was harmless, just a minor inconvenience, part of mining life. They lied. By the 1960 seconds, people started getting sick. Not just the miners, everyone. Workers' wives, children, people who'd never worked in the mine but had lived in Wittenoom for years. They developed strange breathing problems, chronic coughs, chest pains, and then the diagnoses started coming. Mesothelioma, asbestosis, lung cancer, and they started dying. The government finally shut down the mine in 1966. Too dangerous, they said. Too many people sick. The company fought it, but eventually gave in. Australian blue asbestos closed. The mine was abandoned, and the people of Wittenoom were told to leave. Most did. By the 1970 seconds, the population had dropped to a few thousand. By the 1980 seconds, a few hundred. By the 1990 seconds, less than 100. But some people refused to leave. This was their home, their town. Where were they supposed to go? Many couldn't afford to move. Others were already too sick to relocate, so they stayed, and they kept dying. The Australian government tried everything to get people out of Wittenoom. They removed it from maps. They closed the town's access roads. They shut down the electricity, the water, the phone service. They delisted it as an official town. In 2007, they literally erased Wittenoom from existence. Officially, it's not a place anymore. It doesn't have a zip code. It doesn't appear on government documents. If you tell someone your address is in Wittenoom, the mail won't be delivered because Wittenoom doesn't exist, but people still live there. As of the last unofficial count in 2020, there were 6 residents, 6 holdouts, who refused to leave despite everything, and they're all sick. Let me tell you what living in Wittenoom is like now. The town is dead, completely dead. The buildings are abandoned, the houses are falling apart, the mine infrastructure is rusting and collapsing, the streets are cracked and overgrown, and everything, every surface, is still covered in asbestos dust. 75 years after mining started, the dust is still there. Still in the air, still in the soil, still in every breath you take, because asbestos doesn't decay, it doesn't wash away, it's permanent, and Wittenoom is one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Walking through Wittenoom is walking through a death trap. Every step kicks up dust, dust that contains millions of microscopic asbestos fibers, fibers that will lodge in your lungs and 20 or 30 years later give you cancer. One afternoon in Wittenoom is enough exposure to potentially cause mesothelioma decades down the line, and the people who still live there, they're breathing it every day, every hour, every breath is poisoning them. I spoke to someone who visited Wittenoom in 2018, an urban explorer named Jake. He went with full protective gear, respirator, protective suit, the works. It's apocalyptic, he told me. That's the only word for it. The town looks like something out of a post-nuclear war movie. Everything's abandoned, everything's decaying, and there's this blue tint to everything, the dust. It's everywhere. We walked through the town center, saw the old stores, the cinema, the hotel, all empty, windows broken, roofs collapsed, nature taking over. But here's what got me. We saw someone, an old man, maybe 70, walking down the main street. No protective gear, just walking, like it was a normal day in a normal town. We called out to him, asked if he lived here. He said yes, said he'd been in Wittenoom since 1950, worked in the mine for 15 years. We asked if he was sick. He laughed, said, "Course, I'm sick. Everyone here is sick. But where else am I gonna go? This is home." He looked terrible, gaunt, pale, breathing heavy, clearly dying. We asked why he stayed. Why not leave? Get treatment somewhere. He said, "Treatment for what? Mesothelioma? There is no treatment. It's a death sentence. I'm already dead. I'm just waiting for my body to figure it out. Might as well wait here, in my home, with my memories." And then he walked away, disappeared into one of the buildings. We didn't follow. We left Wittenoom after a few hours. Even with protective gear, I was terrified. Terrified that I'd somehow been exposed. That decades from now, I'll start coughing and get a diagnosis and die because I was stupid enough to visit a poisoned town. I threw away all my clothes when I got home. Everything. Burned my shoes. Took a dozen showers. But I still worry, because asbestos is forever, and Wittenoom is forever, and maybe I brought some of it home with me. The death toll from Wittenoom is staggering. Over 2,000 people have died from asbestos-related diseases linked to the town. That number grows every year as more former residents and workers develop mesothelioma decades after leaving. Some estimates suggest the final death toll could reach 3,000 or more, because mesothelioma can take 40 or 50 years to develop. People who lived in Wittenoom as children in the 1,960 seconds are only now getting sick. And the 6 people who still live there, they're all dying. All of them have been diagnosed with asbestos-related diseases. All of them know they're terminal, but they've chosen to die in Wittenoom, in their home, rather than leave and die in some hospital in Perth or Sydney, surrounded by strangers. There's something profoundly sad about Wittenoom. It's not just a ghost town. It's a monument to corporate greed and government negligence, to a time when companies prioritized profits over worker safety, when thousands of people were knowingly exposed to a deadly substance, when an entire town was poisoned and then abandoned. The Australian government wants people to forget about Wittenoom. They removed it from maps, erased it from official records, made it as difficult as possible to visit. But they can't erase the deaths. They can't erase the families destroyed, the children who played in asbestos dust and died at 40, the wives who washed their husbands' work clothes and inhaled fibers and developed lung cancer. Wittenoom is a crime scene, and the evidence is literally everywhere, in the dust, in the ruins, in the bodies of everyone who ever lived there. There's a debate about what to do with Wittenoom. Some say it should be completely demolished, every building destroyed, the site cleaned as much as possible, sealed off from human access forever. Others say it should be preserved as a memorial, a warning about what happens when safety is ignored, a reminder that some decisions have consequences that last generations. The government's current approach is to simply wait for the last residents to die, wait for the buildings to collapse on their own, wait for time and nature to bury Wittenoom under enough dust and dirt that people forget it ever existed. But Wittenoom will never truly be gone, because the asbestos is still there, will always be there. Wittenoom Gorge will be contaminated for thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands. Asbestos is forever, and so Wittenoom will forever be a place of death, a place where the ground itself is poisonous, where taking a single breath can kill you, eventually, where the sins of the past are literally in the air. The last resident of Wittenoom won't admit his name publicly, but he's in his 80s now, been in the town since 1955, worked in the mine for a decade, raised his family there. His wife died of mesothelioma in 2002. His daughter died of lung cancer in 2015, both from Wittenoom asbestos exposure. He's sick too, has been for years, knows he's dying, but he stays. When asked why, he said, because someone has to remember. Someone has to be here when the last building falls, when the last road cracks apart, when Wittenoom finally disappears completely. Someone has to remember the 20,000 people who lived here, who worked here, who died here, who were killed by a company that knew better but didn't care. So I stay, until my body gives out, until the asbestos finally wins. And then maybe I'll join my wife, my daughter, all the others who Wittenoom killed, and maybe our ghosts will keep the town alive, keep it from being forgotten, keep it as a warning, because if we forget Wittenoom, it'll happen again. Another town, another company, another poison that makes money. So someone has to remember, and I guess that someone is me. Wittenoom, Australia, the town that kills, the town that will never stop killing, the town that exists and doesn't exist. That's on no map, but is very, very real. If you ever find yourself in Western Australia, you might see signs warning you away from Wittenoom. The government has posted them on every approach road. Listen to those warnings. Don't visit Wittenoom. Don't breathe its air. Don't walk its streets. Don't take its dust home with you. Because Wittenoom doesn't forgive. And asbestos is forever. And some places are places of death, long after everyone has left. Story 9. Tomioka, Japan. The town frozen in time. Now we're heading to Japan, to the Fukushima prefecture on the eastern coast, to a town that was thriving and modern, a town of 16,000 people, a town that had schools and restaurants and shops and families, a town that, in a single day, became a ghost town. Tomioka, Japan. If you don't know why Tomioka is abandoned, let me remind you of March 11th, 2011, the Tohoku earthquake, magnitude 9.1, one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. It triggered a massive tsunami, waves over 130 feet high slamming into the coast of Japan. Over 18,000 people died. But the earthquake and tsunami weren't the only disasters that day, because the tsunami damaged the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, knocked out the cooling systems, and 3 of the reactors went into meltdown, releasing massive amounts of radiation into the air and water. Tomioka is 5 miles from the Fukushima plant, 5 miles from the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. On March 11, 2011, at 2:46 p.m. local time, Tomioka was a normal town. People at work, kids in school, regular life. By 8 p.m. that same day, the government ordered a full evacuation. Everyone out. Now. Bring nothing. Just go. And they did. All 16,000 residents. They got in their cars, got on buses, walked if they had to, and they left. Left their homes, their possessions, their lives. They were told it would be temporary. A few days, maybe a week. Just until the situation at the power plant was under control. That was March 11th, 2011. As of 2024, Tomioka is still mostly abandoned. The evacuation order was only partially lifted in 2017, and even now, only about 1,400 people have returned out of 16,000 because Tomioka is contaminated. The radiation from Fukushima spread over the town, soaked into the soil, the buildings, the water, everything. And unlike other disasters, radiation doesn't go away quickly. It takes decades, centuries in some cases. Tomioka will be contaminated for the rest of our lifetimes and beyond. I want you to imagine what Tomioka is like now. It's 2024. Over 13 years since the evacuation, and the town looks exactly as it did in 2011. Frozen in time. Cars sit in driveways, slowly rusting. Bicycles lean against walls where they were left. Laundry hangs on lines, faded by years of sun and rain. Shoes sit in entryways. Dishes sit in sinks. Stores still have merchandise on the shelves. Convenience stores with expired food. Clothing stores with mannequins modeling 2011 fashion. Electronics stores with obsolete technology. Schools are perhaps the most haunting. Classrooms with textbooks open on desks, children's artwork on the walls, backpacks hanging on hooks, lunch trays in the cafeteria. Everything exactly as it was when the kids were evacuated. It's like the entire town just stopped. Like someone hit pause on 16,000 lives and never pressed play again. The Japanese government has tried to clean up Tomioka. They've scraped away the topsoil in some areas, removing the most contaminated earth. They've demolished some buildings that were too damaged or too radioactive to save. They've installed monitoring stations throughout the town to measure radiation levels, and they've declared parts of Tomioka safe for habitation. That's why 1,400 people have returned. They're living in the supposedly decontaminated areas, trying to rebuild their lives. But it's not the same. It can never be the same, because radiation is invisible. You can't see it, can't smell it, can't feel it, but it's there, everywhere, in varying levels, but always there. And the psychological toll of that is immense. Imagine living in your home, going about your daily life, but always wondering, am I being exposed right now? Is this safe? Will I get cancer in 10 years because I lived here? I spoke to someone who returned to Tomioka in 2018, a woman named Yuki. She'd lived in Tomioka her whole life before the evacuation, raised her family there. When the town reopened, she was one of the first to come back. I had to come home, she told me through a translator. Tomioka is my home. Where else would I go? I lived in temporary housing for 7 years. 7 years in a tiny apartment in Fukushima City. I was miserable. When they said parts of Tomioka were safe, I didn't hesitate. I moved back immediately, but it's not home anymore. It's a ghost town. My neighborhood had 30 families before the disaster. Now there's 3. My house is fine, but the houses around me are empty, falling apart. It's like living in a graveyard, and the fear never goes away. Every time I cough, I wonder if it's from radiation. Every ache, every pain, I wonder if it's the beginning of cancer. The government says it's safe, but do I believe them? Can I believe them? My daughter won't come back. She has children now, grandchildren I rarely see. She says it's too dangerous, that she won't expose her family to radiation no matter what the government says. I understand, but it hurts, because I'm here, I'm alive, I'm fine. But she treats Tomioka like it's poisoned, like I'm living in a death trap. Maybe I am. I don't know anymore. But the returnees aren't what makes Tomioka creepy. What makes Tomioka creepy is the abandoned zone. Because while parts of Tomioka have been decontaminated and reopened, large sections remain closed, too contaminated to enter. The government has sealed them off. No one is allowed in without special permission and protective gear. These are called the difficult to return zones, places where the radiation is still too high, where contamination is too severe, where it's simply not safe for human habitation and won't be for decades. And these zones are completely frozen in time, untouched since 2011. Urban explorers, photographers, and researchers have occasionally been granted permission to enter these zones, and what they've documented is haunting. Homes with meals still on the tables, the food long since decayed, but the dishes remain. Table settings for families who never came home. Personal belongings scattered everywhere. Photographs, toys, clothes, treasured possessions left behind because people thought they'd be coming back in a few days. And the animals, when Tomioka was evacuated, pets were left behind. People weren't allowed to bring their animals. The evacuation was too rushed, too chaotic, so cats and dogs and other pets were left in homes, presumably to be collected later, but later never came. Some pets escaped and formed feral populations. These animals have been living in the contaminated zone for over a decade now, hunting, breeding, surviving, but they're changed, mutated. There are reports of animals with strange deformities, extra limbs, missing eyes, unusual coloring. The radiation has affected them, changed their DNA, created something wrong. And these animals are territorial, aggressive. They attack anyone who enters the abandoned zones, not out of fear, but out of anger. Like they blame humans for what happened, for abandoning them in this radioactive wasteland. One photographer who was granted access to the forbidden zone told me about his experience. I was there to document the abandoned homes, to capture the tragedy of Tomioka, show people what nuclear disaster really looks like. I was in a residential neighborhood, houses on both sides of the street, all empty, all slowly decaying, nature taking over, vines growing up walls, trees pushing through roofs. And I heard something, movement. In one of the houses, I called out. No response. So I approached, carefully, Geiger counter in hand. Radiation levels were elevated but not immediately dangerous. I looked through a window, and I saw them. Dogs, maybe 6 or 7, living in the house. They'd broken in, or maybe they were the family's pets. They'd made the house their den, and they were wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Wrong. One had patchy fur and strange growths on its skin. Another had eyes that didn't look right, asymmetrical, too large. Another was missing most of its front leg but didn't seem to care. They stared at me, all of them, and I felt it, this overwhelming hostility, like they knew I was human, like they hated me for it. One of them started barking, and then they all did, and they ran at the window, slammed into it. The glass cracked but held. I ran, didn't stop, until I was back at the checkpoint, back in the safe zone. I developed my photos later, and in one of the shots, looking through the window at those dogs, I noticed something in the background. Upstairs, in one of the bedrooms, a figure, human-shaped, standing in the window, watching. But that house was supposed to be empty. Everyone evacuated in 2011. Who was that? Was it a squatter? A former resident who came back illegally? Or something else? Something that shouldn't be there? I don't know, and I never went back to find out. There are rumors about the forbidden zone in Tomioka. Rumors that the government doesn't just keep people out because of radiation. Rumors that there are other reasons. That people who enter the zone illegally sometimes don't come out. That there are things living in the abandoned town. Things that aren't just feral animals. Things that were changed by the radiation, or that were created by it. That at night, you can see lights in the windows of abandoned homes, hear voices, hear children playing in schools that have been empty for over a decade. That the town isn't as empty as it's supposed to be. That some people never left. That they're still there, still living their lives, still trapped in March 11th, 2011, caught in a loop, living the same day over and over, not realizing the disaster happened, not realizing they're dead. The government denies all of this, of course. Says the zone is empty, except for animals. Says the radiation is the only danger. Says there's nothing supernatural or unexplainable about Tomioka. But the people who've been inside the zone tell different stories, consistent stories, about seeing figures that shouldn't be there, hearing sounds from empty buildings, feeling watched, feeling hunted, about a town that's more than just abandoned, a town that's alive somehow, alive with the ghosts of what was, alive with the memories of 16,000 people who lost everything in a single day, alive with radiation, alive with mutation, alive with something wrong. Tomioka, Japan, a modern ghost town, a town killed not by time or economics, but by radiation, by human error, by a disaster that never should have happened. The government says Tomioka will eventually be fully reopened, that the contamination will fade, that life will return to normal, but the people who lived there know better. Tomioka will never be normal again. The radiation will be there for generations. The trauma will last longer than the radiation. The memory of that day, March 11th, 2011, will outlive everyone who experienced it. Tomioka is a warning, a reminder that modern technology can fail, that disasters can happen in an instant, that an entire town, an entire way of life, can disappear in a single day, and that some places, once contaminated, can never truly be cleaned, can never truly be home again. They're just ghost towns, frozen in time, waiting for people who will never return, haunted not by spirits, but by radiation, haunted not by the past, but by the future that was stolen. Tomioka, the town that stopped, and will never start again. Story 10. Salem, Massachusetts. Secret history. The witch trials, hidden victims. For our final town, we're coming full circle, back to America, to New England, to one of the most famous small towns in American history, Salem, Massachusetts. Everyone knows about Salem. The witch trials of 1692, one of the darkest chapters in American history. 20 people executed for witchcraft, dozens more imprisoned, a community tearing itself apart in mass hysteria. But I'm not here to tell you about the trials themselves. You know that story. You learned it in school. I'm here to tell you about what they don't teach you, about the hidden history of Salem, about what happened after the trials ended, about the victims who weren't officially recognized, about the legacy that Salem still carries today. The Salem witch trials officially lasted from February 1692 to May 1693. In that time, over 200 people were accused of witchcraft. 20 were executed, 14 women and 6 men, 19 by hanging, 1 by being pressed to death. But those aren't the only deaths, because people died in prison. The conditions were horrific, dark, cold, disease-ridden. People were kept in chains, tortured, interrogated for hours. Many of them were elderly, many were children. Yes, children. Kids as young as 4 years old were imprisoned for witchcraft, and they died there, in those dark cells, from sickness, from cold, from abuse, from despair. The records are incomplete, but historians estimate at least 5 people died in prison during the trials. Some estimates are higher, much higher, and those deaths aren't officially counted among the victims of the witch trials. They weren't executed, so they don't make it into the history books. They're just footnotes, if they're mentioned at all. But here's what really haunts Salem, what the city tries to forget, what tourists aren't told when they visit the witch trial memorials. After the trials ended, after the hysteria faded and people realized what they'd done, after the governor pardoned the remaining accused witches, Salem had a problem. Bodies. 20 people had been executed, hanged, their bodies cut down from Gallows Hill, and in the 1690 seconds, people executed for witchcraft weren't given proper burials. They were considered criminals, condemned, cursed, so the bodies were disposed of, in unmarked graves, in hidden locations, places the town wanted to forget, and no one kept records of where those bodies went. For over 300 years, Salem's dark secret was buried. Literally, the locations of the witch trial victims' graves were lost, forgotten. The city grew up around them. Houses were built, streets were paved, the dead were built over and forgotten. But in 2016, researchers finally found one of the burial sites. Using ground-penetrating radar and historical documents, they located a crevice in the rocks at Proctor's Ledge, at the base of Gallows Hill. That's where the bodies were thrown. After being hanged on Gallows Hill, the bodies were cut down and disposed of in this rocky crevice, just thrown in, like garbage, covered with dirt and rocks, forgotten. And this wasn't a proper cemetery. This was a dumping ground, a hidden place where the town's shame could be buried and forgotten. The city of Salem has since created a memorial at Proctor's Ledge, a quiet place to honor the victims. But it doesn't change what happened there. It doesn't erase the disrespect, the cruelty, and it doesn't explain where the other bodies are, because Proctor's Ledge can't be the only burial site. There were people who died in prison, people whose bodies wouldn't have been taken to Gallows Hill, people who might have been buried right where they died, in the prison yard, under the jail, in unmarked pits. Salem has been continuously inhabited for almost 400 years. Every building, every street, every parking lot could potentially be built over forgotten graves, over the bodies of witch trial victims who were never properly laid to rest. And Salem knows this. The city knows. When construction projects happen, when old buildings are demolished, when they dig foundations for new structures, they find things. Bones, sometimes. Old artifacts. Signs of forgotten burials. But these discoveries are rarely publicized because Salem has an image to maintain. It's a tourist town, Halloween capital of the world, witch city. People come to Salem for spooky fun, for witch museums and ghost tours and Halloween festivities. They don't come to hear about mass graves and forgotten victims and the city's refusal to acknowledge the full scope of what happened in 1692. So when bones are found, they're quietly dealt with, reburied somewhere else, or analyzed and then stored in archives. The construction continues, the buildings go up, and the dead remain forgotten. I spoke to someone who works in Salem, a construction worker named Tom. He's worked on renovation projects throughout the city for over 20 years. We find stuff, he told me, all the time, bones mostly, sometimes artifacts from the 1600s, stuff that shouldn't be there, stuff that suggests people were buried in places that aren't marked as graveyards. Most of the time, we report it. Archaeological survey comes in, they document everything, and then they tell us to keep it quiet. Don't talk to the press, don't mention it to tourists, just finish the job. But there's one site I worked on that I can't forget. This was maybe 10 years ago. Old building downtown, 1700s construction. They wanted to convert it to shops. We were digging out the basement to make it deeper, create more retail space. And we found a pit, a big pit, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, filled with bones, human bones, not just one or two, dozens, maybe 50 people, just thrown in, like a mass grave. The archaeologists came in, took samples, tried to date the remains, and based on the artifacts they found with the bones, they estimated 1,690 seconds, right around the witch trials. They sealed it back up, told us to concrete over it, said the bones couldn't be moved without extensive testing and documentation, and there wasn't budget for that, so they just left them there, buried under a gift shop now. Tourists walk over them every day and have no idea, but I know, and sometimes I think about those people, who they were, how they died, why they were thrown in a pit and forgotten, and whether they're at peace now, having tourists walking over their graves, or whether they're angry, restless, because I've been in that shop, and it feels wrong, cold, unwelcoming. People don't stay long. The business has trouble keeping tenants. The current owner has told me she hears things at night, footsteps, voices, crying. I told her what's underneath. She didn't believe me at first, but then she did some research, found out the building has a history. Several owners have left suddenly. Several employees have quit, saying the place is haunted. And maybe it is. Maybe the people buried there, the forgotten victims of Salem's witch hysteria, maybe they're still here, still trying to be remembered, still trying to get justice. Modern Salem is a strange place. It simultaneously embraced its witch trial history and tried to sanitize it. The city markets itself as a witch destination. They have witch museums and witch shops and witch tours. October in Salem is a massive festival, hundreds of thousands of tourists. But the actual history, the real horror of what happened in 1692, is downplayed, made palatable, turned into entertainment. The victims are commemorated, but only the official victims, the 20 executed, maybe the 5 who died in prison if you count those, but not the others. Not the people who died from the aftermath, from the trauma, from being accused but not executed, having their lives destroyed but surviving. Not the people who committed suicide after being released from prison. Not the families torn apart. Not the children who lost parents. Not the community that was shattered, and certainly not the forgotten dead, the unmarked graves, the mass burial pits, the bodies hidden under streets and buildings and parking lots. There's a phenomenon in Salem that locals talk about but rarely explain to tourists. It's called the Salem feeling. It's a sense of unease that overtakes people in certain parts of the city, especially at night, especially in autumn, especially around the anniversary of the trials. People describe it as a weight, a pressure, like the air is heavier, like something is watching you, following you, angry at you. Tour guides will tell you it's just the spooky atmosphere, the Halloween decorations, the power of suggestion. But people who live in Salem year-round, who experience it when there are no tourists and no Halloween parties, they know it's something else. It's the dead, one longtime resident told me. The ones who were never properly mourned, never properly buried, never given justice. They're still here, still angry, still hurting, and they want to be remembered. They want people to know what really happened, not the sanitized version the city sells, not the witches as feminist icons narrative, not the fun Halloween version. They want people to know they were murdered, that they were innocent, that they died in terror and pain, that they were buried like garbage and forgotten. And until Salem acknowledges that, until the city stops profiting off their deaths without honoring their memory, they'll stay, they'll haunt, they'll make people feel that weight, that pressure, that wrongness, because Salem owes them truth, owes them respect, owes them peace, and Salem hasn't paid that debt. So when you visit Salem, if you visit Salem, remember this: you're walking on graves, graves you can't see, graves no one talks about, graves of people who died in one of the darkest chapters of American history, and those people are still there, in the ground beneath your feet, in the old buildings you walk through, in the air you breathe. They're still there, waiting, watching, hoping that someone, someday, will remember them properly, will acknowledge their suffering, will give them the peace they were denied in life. Salem, Massachusetts, a town that became famous for killing innocent people, a town that now profits from that killing by turning it into entertainment, a town built on top of forgotten graves, and a town that, despite everything, despite the memorials and the museums and the apologies, has never truly acknowledged the full scope of what happened. The official death toll is 25, 20 executed, 5 dead in prison. But the real death toll? No one knows. No one has ever counted the suicides, the people who died from trauma, the people who died from diseases contracted in prison, the people who were quietly buried in unmarked graves and forgotten. The real death toll could be 50, could be 100, could be more. And until Salem acknowledges that, until the city stops building over graves and starts excavating them, until they stop marketing the trials as spooky fun and start treating them as the tragedy they were, the dead will not rest. They will haunt, and Salem will continue to be what it's always been, a town cursed by its own history, a town that killed its own people and then forgot about them, a town where the ghosts outnumber the living forever. And there you have it, 10 small towns, 10 stories of places where something went terribly wrong, where communities were destroyed, where people suffered and died, where the land itself became cursed or contaminated or haunted. Centralia, burning forever. Cahawba, drowned in floods and inhabited by ghosts. Bodie, cursed and protective of its artifacts. Pittsburgh, undermined by the tunnels beneath it. Colonia Dignidad, a torture compound disguised as a utopia. Monowi, a town of one living resident and countless dead ones. Helltown, evacuated and poisoned. Wittenoom, contaminated by asbestos forever. Tomioka, frozen in time by radiation. And Salem, built on top of forgotten graves. These towns represent different types of horror: environmental disasters, corporate negligence, government cover-ups, human evil, supernatural phenomena, or maybe all of these at once. But they all share something in common. They're warnings. Warnings about what happens when we prioritize profit over safety, when we ignore signs of danger, when we let terrible things happen and then try to forget about them. These towns didn't just die, they were killed. By fires, by floods, by greed, by negligence, by radiation, by hysteria, by human cruelty. And in many cases, they weren't allowed to rest in peace. They were abandoned, forgotten, left to decay, or worse, turned into tourist attractions, monetized, made into entertainment. The rain is still falling outside your window. You're still safe where you are. But now you know about these 10 towns. Now you carry their stories with you. And maybe that's important. Maybe these stories need to be told, need to be remembered, because forgetting them means we might repeat them, means we might let another Centralia burn, another Wittenoom poison its residents, another Salem hunt witches, metaphorically if not literally. These towns are warnings, written in ash and blood, and radiation and graves, and we ignore them at our peril. If you ever find yourself near any of these places, if you ever have the chance to visit them, approach with respect. These aren't just tourist destinations, they're graveyards, memorials, sacred ground made sacred by suffering. And if you feel something when you visit, if you feel watched, if you feel unwelcome, if you feel the weight of all that pain and tragedy pressing down on you, don't ignore it. That's the dead speaking. That's the land remembering. That's history refusing to be forgotten. Listen to it, learn from it, and carry those stories forward, because that's how we honor the dead. That's how we prevent these tragedies from happening again, by remembering, by learning, by refusing to look away. Thanks for listening tonight. Thanks for sharing these 2 hours with me, with these towns, with their stories. I hope you sleep well. But if you don't, if you find yourself thinking about burning towns or abandoned hospitals or cursed ghost towns, well, that's not a bad thing. It means you're paying attention. It means you care. It means you understand that horror isn't always supernatural. Sometimes it's very real, very human, and very much still happening. Stay safe out there. Lock your doors. And remember, some towns are small for a reason. Some places are isolated for a reason. And some stories are scary because they're true. Until next time.